You know, a nice straight drive means that the club face had to have been pretty square to my target line. However, most golfers do not tend to have the club face square. They tend to leave the club very open. And therefore, on a right-handed golfer, their shots slice or push way off to the right. So right after this, let's talk about some of the different sources that we can use to help square up the club face. Some are better than others, but stay tuned. Hey, this is Steve from hititlonger.com. I'm on a journey to hit longer, straighter tee shots, longer and straighter just in general. So if that's your goal too, then come along, and if you get value out of this video at the end, I hope you'll hit the subscribe button. So we need some force in the golf swing in order to make the club face get squared to the target. The biomechanical term for this force would be torque. So torque is a force that tends to produce rotation. In this case, it'll tend to cause the face to rotate one way or another, and most golfers don't have enough of it. So let's talk about the different sources and the different types of torque that we need to apply in a golf swing to get the club to square up and get the ball to go straight. So first, let's talk about the obvious sources of torque, and that's what some people might call active torque. So this is the torque that you feel when you're swinging. It's the torque that's coming out of your wrists and forearms that you're feeling if you're whipping the club or turning the club with your hands or your forearms or your wrists. We're going to call this active torque. It's the torque that you can feel. It feels active. So we have three different sources of torque here. I'll show you from this angle first. First, we have a potential source of torque moving the wrists this way. Do you see here that right now the club face is perhaps 30 degrees pointing to the right of my target? If I just move my wrists like this, do you see the club gets rotated right down the fairway on its way through? So that's one source of active torque. I'll show you from this angle. It's just this flapping motion. It's advancing the club, and it's going from, let's see, 30 degrees to the right to square to 30 degrees to the left as I finish the flap through. So that is certainly one source of force that I can apply with my muscles of my wrists and forearms that will cause the club to rotate in respect to the target line. Not in respect to the arc, but the target line. Another source of active torque in the forearms is if I were to do this motion. You see? This motion here, the club face is 90 degrees open to the target, and now it's 90 degrees closed to the target. So it certainly is an active force that I would apply with my wrists that would cause the club face to rotate and potentially square up. It would be especially effective if I used it with this downwards move of the wrist and back up again to send it down through the ball rather than just through above the ball in space. So we already talked about the what I call the flapping move first. This is what I would call the flipping move. Okay, you see? If I turn the shaft about itself like this, I can make the club rapidly close relative to the target line in a very small amount of space. You see, the club face itself is hardly moving at all in space. That's why I refer to this type of torque as the, quote, emergency parachute. So if you're coming in and you're really open right at the last second, boy, you can just spin the club shaft like this very abruptly, and at least, hey, you can solve the problem of having the face open, and you can get the club square some of the time if you can time it. Very difficult to time. This is not a long-term solution, but hey, if I'm missing everything out into the right trees and it just seems like there's no hope, well, I might give this a shot, at least for the near term. Now let's talk about some of the sources of what we might call passive torque. These are These are torques, or again, forces that tend to cause the rotation of the club face, or even tend to cause the rotation of the club head around its handle, because that also helps to square the face. You may not feel these. They're kind of hidden in the rest of the swing. So here's one source. One such source is the rising of the left shoulder up this way. I would not discourage you from doing that. I would want you to do it as much as possible, because what that's doing is it's pulling the handle up with it, and that torque upwards is going to cause the club to accelerate around the handle. You see, if I've got a pendulum here, and I were to lift the handle, you see, I turn a small arc and I get more acceleration out of it if I simply lift it. You see? Lift it. And you saw the club swung about twice as far around the circle than it originally was. So golfers you might see this greatly in would be like a Bubba Watson. Take a look at his swing. His lead shoulder really goes vertical as he goes into the ball. And again, that's a source of torque that causes the club head to advance or accelerate around and past the handle. And when it does that, it's simply staying square to the arc, and therefore it is rotating closed relative to the target line, but square to the arc. Another source of passive torque that helps to square the club face, you may also, because it's passive, you don't necessarily feel it, it's in the way that you use the ground. So whether or not you're a jumper like a Justin Thomas or a Kyle Berkshire in long drive, where they actually get airborne with both feet just past impact, really, really cool to see. But just because you're not jumping doesn't necessarily mean that you're not using the ground really well. See, I'm my heaviest right about here. That's when my center of mass has stopped dropping, and it's now starting to level off and lift right about here. So as the handle's going down, my center of gravity is dropping, my center of mass is dropping almost into like a little bit of a squat, and I'm actually getting heavier in regards to the ground. I might be getting as much as twice my actual body weight down into the ground. Now as they get to about here and the club starts to curve and wants to start heading up in a minute, I'm going to precede that, and you'll see how my belt is tilting and essentially lifting. So my center of mass has bottomed out, and that's not my heaviest, that's actually my lightest. Then as my center of mass starts to raise, that's when I'm actually doing the pushing off the ground. Now, what we're doing when we do that, again, is we're applying a torque to the handle upwards. And you see what's going to happen? It's going to be like a lever, like a fulcrum is right here. And you see it's going to accelerate the club. As I pull up on the handle, it's going to accelerate the club down and around. And anything that causes the club head to pass the handle, see if I won't spin the shaft at all, but just rotate the club around it on this axis. It is causing the club face to rotate relative to the target line. Let's look at it from this angle. You see I'm here. As I start to stand up, I'm already standing up here. The handle is being pulled upwards, causing the club head to accelerate and catch up to the handle and pass it freely. Okay, there's one last major source of passive torque. I'm sure the biomechanical experts out there are going to remind me that I'm probably missing many other sources, but these are the main ones that we could actually have some effect, I believe, in our swing technique. And that is the last source of passive torque that's very important to note is the path of the handle. We could look at it at this end, and that's the most obvious end. Really where the torque is being applied is right between the hands, right here, and the hands themselves applying the torque. This would be what's called a couple. Just think of a couple of hands supplying torque. Very simple to understand. So my hands are applying the torque, but it's being affected greatly by what actually this part of the stick is doing. So if this part of the stick, we would like it to keep rotating around to the left like this. And again, we're getting that fulcrum where if I pull the handle around to the left, the club face simply wants to try to come around it to square up. So the more of those three passive sources of torque you can get into your swing, not only will your club head speed go up the most, but you'll have so much squaring torque for this club face that some players feel like they don't even have to apply a torque with their hands. It's not true, but they feel like their hands are very soft and not very active. And that may be true. They may not be applying as much to get the same speed. It certainly doesn't feel like you need to make a squaring move with your hands. You don't need to roll the club over so violently to get it to square up, compared to, say, if the handle was heading out this way and not going on a curve, but going on a line at the target or right of the target, there won't be any leverage for the club to come around and square up, and therefore you'd be in this position and need the emergency parachute I was talking about by actively taking your wrist and flipping the club over. It'll feel like you have to muscle it to get it closed. So if your swing feels like it's just straight and you don't have to do much with your hands, well, that's really good. That probably means that you have plenty of the passive torque built into your swing, and that's very good swing mechanics, because it probably means that your rate of face closure through the impact zone is going to be lower, and therefore maybe a little bit easier to time than a guy whose club face is going violently open to close. That would certainly take a lot more talent and practice. For me, I'm always seeking to increase the passive torque going on in my swing simply by improving my handle path and the way that I use the ground. And this has allowed me to feel like the club is just coming in square and I don't have to do anything to it except accelerate it. I don't feel as much anymore that I have to try to muscle the face closed to get it to square up. It's almost like it's magic, like it's just square and I just have to keep it on line. So hey, I hope this video has been of some value to you and maybe illuminated a little bit on the different sources that we will use to help square up the club face so that the ball can go straight. I'm going to get back to it again and work on my passive torque a little bit more, because I always seem to need a little bit more of that so I don't have to fight so hard to keep the ball from going off to the right. Hey, thanks to Golf Development Complex here in Moore Park, California. Please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.